At my daughter's funeral, her husband kicked me out of the home I'd lived in for decades. My name is Eleanor Vance. The events that followed shifted my entire world. Imagine this: your only child has just passed away. You are drowning in grief, and your son-in-law stares at you coldly and demands, "That's enough crying. Get your things together and leave my house immediately." He labeled me a useless freeloader in plain view of every mourner at my daughter's service. But here is the truth Victor didn't grasp. The home he was ejecting me from? I had it built in 1987. The inheritance he was counting on? $850,000 that had always been, and remained, mine. For 8 years, he had benefited from my kindness, all while acting as if I were the one receiving charity. Rather than causing a scene, I simply turned and left. Occasionally, saying nothing is the strongest statement one can make. What Victor found out just 3 days later would teach us both a permanent lesson: making assumptions can lead to devastating consequences. I should begin where it all started. The warning signs were present from the very start. I had simply decided not to see them. When my daughter Diana was killed in that awful car crash 2 months prior, Victor instantly seized control. The shock was so profound. I remember staring at my phone, seeing 102 missed calls from friends and family that I just couldn't answer. "Don't you worry about the funeral plans, Eleanor," he said. "I will take care of it all." What he was actually communicating was, "Don't interfere." At the mortuary, he dictated every choice. The casket, the floral arrangements, even the memorial music. When I gently suggested Diana's favorite song, the one we'd listened to constantly while planning this very house back in 1987, he dismissed me. "That's far too gloomy," Victor declared. "We must have something more hopeful." I observed him orchestrating the event in his expensive black suit, managing the guests as if he were the producer of this terrible performance. And I sat quietly in my old navy blue dress, the same one I'd worn to my own husband's funeral 2 years before, feeling completely unseen. The next indication appeared during the wake held at our home. My home, to be precise, though Victor had been acting as if it were his ever since Diana passed. He cornered me in the kitchen. "Eleanor, we must discuss your predicament." "My predicament?" "You are financially reliant on us. Diana was taking care of you, and now that she's gone." He shrugged. "I simply cannot take on that burden." Burden. The word struck me with more force than I anticipated. "I have been incredibly generous allowing you to live here," he went on, "but this house belongs to me now. Everything is. Diana left everything to me." I merely inclined my head, slowly. Victor interpreted that nod as surrender. What he failed to see was the calculation behind my quiet gaze. He had no clue that Diana had never held the title to this house. She lived here, certainly. She grew up within these walls, of course. But own it? Not for a single day. He also was unaware of the metal filing cabinet in my basement office. 4 drawers filled with perfectly organized financial statements spanning 4 decades. The retired accountant in me never discarded a single record. More significantly, he knew nothing about the trust. But I am getting ahead of the story. The mourners saw exactly what Victor wanted them to perceive: a successful, competent man taking control during a devastating family tragedy, and an elderly woman who was incapable of managing her own life. They watched him firmly shake hands and receive sympathies as if he were the new patriarch of the family. All the while, I sat silently in Diana's favorite armchair, the one I'd gifted her for her 16th birthday, and overheard him painting a picture of me as the dependent mother-in-law. "Eleanor is taking this very hard, finding it difficult to adjust," I heard him say to our neighbor, Helen Davis. "The poor woman has no grasp of finances. Diana managed all of that for her." Helen glanced at me with pity. She had been my neighbor for 37 years, ever since the day the foundation was poured on this very lot. Yet even she appeared to accept Victor's narrative. It was then I understood a crucial truth: people perceive what they are conditioned to perceive. Victor expected to find a grieving widow, a frail old woman who couldn't possibly cope on her own. And so, that is precisely what he saw. The older sedan I drove instead of a luxury car. The simple, practical clothes I wore instead of designer labels. The quiet, internal way I processed my sorrow instead of putting on a dramatic display. He mistook my modesty for inability. My silence for weakness. My generosity for desperation. It was, perhaps, an easy error to make. I had spent the 2 years since my husband Arthur's passing living a very simple life. There is no need for costly trinkets or status symbols when one is relearning how to be alone in the world. Diana had understood that. She respected my decision to simplify my lifestyle. But Victor, he measured a person's value by their outward appearance, by the loudness of their voice, and by who dominated the room. He was about to discover that the most formidable person in any situation is the one who has nothing to prove. As the final mourners departed that Tuesday night, Victor blocked my path near the entryway. I was serious about what I said, Eleanor. This living arrangement is no longer functional. I let my gaze wander across the living room I had painted 3 separate times over the years. The hardwood floors I'd helped lay myself. The decorative molding I had measured and cut with Diana when she was just 12. I understand, I replied softly. But Victor had no comprehension of what I understood, and he certainly couldn't fathom what was about to happen. Wednesday morning arrived, bringing with it both strong coffee and sharp clarity. I sat at my kitchen table, the very one Arthur and I had found at an estate sale in 1986, and I began to write a list. It was not a list of what I was about to lose, but rather a list of what Victor believed he was about to gain. First, the house, 2,400 square feet of my life's memories on Maple Street in suburban Cleveland. Its current market value, according to Victor's own expertise as an agent, was $420,000. Second, the life insurance, Diana's policy from her engineering firm, valued at $150,000. Victor was undoubtedly already allocating those funds in his mind. Third, the furnishings, everything from my husband Arthur's antique desk to Diana's collection of architectural books. Worth little to strangers, but invaluable to me. And finally, my dignity, watching Victor stride about as if he had just inherited a vast estate, when in reality he had inherited absolutely nothing of the sort. But the truth was, none of that bothered me as much as something else. It wasn't the assets or even the house. It was the erasure. Victor was methodically eliminating every single trace of the life Arthur and I had constructed in this home. He had already packed away the photographs of my late husband, Arthur, from the mantelpiece. Diana's childhood artwork had vanished from the refrigerator door. Even my old accounting certifications had been taken down from the study wall. I'm redecorating, he explained curtly when I inquired about Arthur's pictures. Diana always mentioned this place felt dated. Dated? As if 40 years of a life lived were just obsolete software needing an upgrade. He gave me 10 days. 10 days to locate a new place to live, subsisting on what he presumed was my meager Social Security check and nothing more. 10 days to box up 4 decades of my existence and act as if it had never mattered. The most callous aspect was the sheer confidence he exuded, the absolute certainty that he possessed all the power. On Tuesday afternoon, he had presented me with a printed schedule, actually printed like I was a renter being formally evicted. November 15th, he stated, tapping the date he had circled in red ink. That provides you with 10 days to secure a spot in a nice retirement community. Somewhere more suitable for your situation. My situation? There was that condescending phrase again. I've already researched a few options, he continued, sliding a stack of glossy brochures across the table as if he were bestowing a great favor upon me. Sunset Manor has vacancies. It's only $800 a month for a studio. $800 a month. He fully expected me to exhaust my entire Social Security income on rent and, presumably, learn to survive on air. And what about food? I asked. Transportation? My medications? He shrugged dismissively. There are programs for people in your situation. Food assistance, Medicaid. The government has systems to care for the elderly. The government. As if I were a charity case who had never paid taxes or contributed a single thing to the world that I in that moment, I understood that Victor didn't just want me out of the house. He wanted me to be grateful for being thrown out. He expected me to thank him for the generosity of 10 days' notice instead of 0. To be appreciative that he wasn't calling the authorities to have me forcibly removed that very instant. He wanted me to accept that this was the new reality now that Diana was gone. But as I sat there on Wednesday morning, with my coffee and my list, a different realization settled in. Victor had based his entire plan on one monumental, false assumption, that Diana had owned everything he was now claiming. He had been married to my daughter for 8 years. He had resided in this house for 8 years. In all that time, he had likely never once seen a property deed, a mortgage bill, or any other document proving ownership. Why would he have? Diana handled their finances, just as her father and I had taught her. That system worked for them. Except Diana had never, ever managed my finances. She helped me around the house, absolutely. She would bring me groceries when the weather was bad or drive me to appointments after Arthur passed. But the money, the investments, the real estate, that had always been, and still was, under my exclusive control. Victor saw Diana's daughterly kindness and mistook it for financial dependency. He saw my appreciation for her help and assumed it was obligation. He looked at my 2 years of quiet mourning and saw only weakness and defeat. If I did nothing, if I just packed my suitcases and meekly relocated to Sunset Manor like a good little old lady, what would that teach him? That intimidation works. That arrogance triumphs over truth. That if you are brazen and condescending enough, you can simply rewrite the past and seize someone's life. It would send the message that respect is optional when dealing with the elderly. That my 40-year marriage to Arthur was meaningless. That the home we built together was just a pile of bricks. That the daughter we raised within these walls could be erased as easily as taking a picture off the mantel. This was about far more than money. This was about my entire existence. But I possessed something Victor knew nothing about. Something that was poised to change the entire game. I only needed to wait for the perfect moment to reveal it. And that moment was approaching much faster than he realized. On Thursday morning, Victor used Diana's key to let himself into my home. I was in the kitchen finishing my breakfast when I heard the front door open. There was no knock. No, good morning. He strode in as if he already owned the place, which, in his deluded mind, he did. "Eleanor, we have to talk," he announced, marching straight into my kitchen with a manila folder tucked under his arm. "About what?" "Your finances." He sat down at the table opposite me, without waiting for an invitation. "I've been thinking about your situation, and I need to get a clear picture of exactly what expenses Diana was covering for you." I took a slow sip of my coffee. "Such as the utilities? The property taxes? The homeowner's insurance?" He opened his folder, producing a legal pad covered in his own handwriting. "Diana never gave me the precise figures, but I must know them so I can adjust my budget accordingly." "Budget for what?" "To take over those payments, of course," he replied, looking at me as if I were senile. "Until you are relocated, I will have to absorb all the costs Diana was paying for you." I set my coffee mug down on the table. "And what, precisely, do you believe Diana was covering?" "Everything," he said. "The mortgage, the taxes, the light bill." "You're on a fixed income, Eleanor. A Social Security check can only go so far." "Is that what Diana told you?" Victor's pen froze over his notepad. "What are you implying?" "I'm asking if Diana specifically informed you that she was paying my bills." "She didn't need to. It's perfectly obvious." He gestured impatiently around my kitchen. "How else could you possibly afford to live in a place like this? This house is valued at over $400,000. And you know it's worth because..." "I'm a real estate agent, Eleanor," he said with a sigh. "I am well aware of the property values around here. But you've never actually laid eyes on the deed, have you?" The question lingered in the quiet kitchen air. Victor's smug expression wavered, just for an instant. "I don't need to see the deed. Diana inherited this house when your husband passed away." "Did she?" "Of course she did." Who else would have gotten it? I stood up from the table and walked calmly to the sink, rinsing my mug with intentional care. You know, Victor, you have constructed an entire narrative based on assumptions about my financial state. They aren't assumptions. They are facts. Are they? What other facts do you possess? He glanced down at his legal pad. Diana told me you never contributed a single penny toward this house. I turned around to face him. Is that what my daughter told you? Yes. How interesting. Because I had this house built in 1987. I paid cash for the land, I hired the building crew, and I personally supervised every single day of the construction. Victor's face hardened. That was 37 years ago. Times change. Some things do, Victor. Ownership documents do not. Look, Eleanor, I realize this is difficult for you. Losing Diana, now having to confront the reality of your finances, but being in denial isn't going to help you. What denial? Pretending that you weren't dependent on family charity. That word, charity, stung like a slap. I dried my hands on a dish towel, moving slowly. Victor, allow me to ask you a question. What? In your 8 years of marriage to my daughter, did Diana ever once show you a mortgage statement for this house? We maintained separate finances. Did she ever mention making a house payment? We didn't scrutinize every single one of her expenditures. Did you ever witness her writing a check for the property taxes? His silence was all the answer I needed. Here is what I believe occurred, I said, leaning back against the kitchen counter. Diana helped me around the house. She'd pick up my groceries, help with some yard work, and you assumed this meant she was supporting me financially. Because that is what it looked like. Appearances, Victor, can be profoundly misleading. He stood up abruptly, his frustration palpable. Fine. Then show me the deed. Prove to me that you own this house. I don't have to prove anything to you. Yes, you do. Because I am Diana's widower, and I have inherited everything. Have you? Stop answering my questions with more questions. And you, I said, should stop making assumptions. We faced each other across the kitchen. Victor's jaw was clenched, his polished, professional composure beginning to fracture. You have until November 15th, he said at last. That's 10 days. After that, I am having the locks changed. We will see about that. He snatched up his papers and stormed toward the door. We'll see about what? But I just offered a small, calm smile and began loading the dishwasher. Some discussions are best concluded in the presence of attorneys. On Friday afternoon, I did something I had not done in several months. I went down to my office in the basement. The basement had always been my private domain. My husband, Arthur, used to tease me, saying I was like a squirrel, hoarding every document and receipt as if they were acorns for a long winter. You just never know when you'll need a paper trail, I would tell him. He would roll his eyes and remind me that most people didn't archive 40 years of bank statements. But I wasn't most people. I was a retired accountant who had learned very early in my career that paper trails tell the true story, and those stories protect you when recollections fade, or when people choose to lie. The metal filing cabinet stood exactly where it always had. 4 drawers of perfect, meticulous organization. Every drawer was labeled by the decade. Every file folder was labeled by its category. Every single document was filed in chronological order. It was, in its own way, a thing of beauty. I pulled open the bottom drawer, 1980s. The decade that had defined my life. Inside, I located the exact folder I needed, real estate, for 47 Maple Street. Yes, 447. The address Victor was now convinced he owned. The first document I pulled was the original land purchase agreement, dated March 12, 1987. Eleanor Vance, buyer. $43,000 for the lot. The second document was the construction contract with Mitchell & Sons Building Company, no relation, just a coincidence, for $78,000 to build a custom colonial home. The third document was the crucial one. The original property deed, officially recorded on March 15, 1987. The owner listed, Eleanor Vance. No co-signers. No joint tenancy. No mortgage. I had paid cash for the entire thing. Victor had no inkling of this, naturally. He would have been just a small child in 1987, likely learning his multiplication tables while I was busy learning how to read architectural blueprints. But that folder contained more. Much more: insurance policies, property tax receipts, utility connection agreements, all in my name, all paid by me, all proving continuous ownership for 37 years. Diana's name appeared nowhere in any of these documents. I pulled out the second drawer. 1990s, more of the same. Property taxes paid annually by Eleanor Vance. Insurance premiums paid quarterly by Eleanor Vance. Even the landscaping receipts were in my name. The 2000s drawer told the same story, and the 2010s, and the most recent file from 2024. But the real surprise was in the very back of the bottom drawer, in a folder labeled, Trust Documents, Private. This was the folder Victor definitely didn't know about. Inside were papers that would change everything. Documents that told a story he couldn't imagine. The first paper was a trust agreement dated June 15, 1985, before Diana was even born, the Eleanor and Arthur Vance Family Trust. The second paper was a bank statement from First National Bank of Ohio. Current balance as of October 31, 2024, $853,412. The third paper was a list of trust beneficiaries. Diana's name was there, yes, but not as an inheritor. As a beneficiary during her lifetime with specific terms and conditions. Terms and conditions that Victor had never bothered to ask about. The trust was complicated, the way these things always are. But the basic structure was simple. Arthur and I were the original trustees. After Arthur's death, I became the sole trustee. Diana received monthly allowances for education, housing assistance, and family support. But ownership? That always remained with the trust, which meant it remained with me. Diana had lived comfortably because I made sure she lived comfortably. The engineering degree I helped pay for, the wedding I helped fund, the various investments and opportunities that came her way. All of it flowed from this trust. All of it remained under my control. Victor saw Diana's comfortable lifestyle and assumed she was independently wealthy. He saw her generosity toward me and assumed it came from her own earnings. He never imagined that the money flowing from Diana to me was actually my own money flowing back home. It's strange how assumptions operate. You see what fits your narrative and disregard what doesn't. Victor expected successful young professionals to support their aging parents. So when he saw Diana helping me, he assumed dependency. He never considered the possibility that I was helping her. But there was one more document in that folder, one that would matter most when the time came for the truth. Diana's life insurance policy. $150,000, just like Victor said. But the beneficiary wasn't Victor. The beneficiary was the Eleanor and Arthur Vance Family Trust, which meant the beneficiary was me. Victor had been spending money that was never his to begin with, making plans with resources that belonged to someone else, building a future on a foundation that didn't exist. I closed the filing cabinet and headed back upstairs. In the kitchen, I made myself a sandwich and thought about timing. Victor had given me until November 15th to move out. Today was November 5th. That gave me exactly 10 days to decide how to handle this situation. I could call him right now, explain the truth, show him the documents, watch his world collapse in real time. Or I could wait. Let him keep making assumptions. Let him dig the hole deeper. Let him learn the lesson the hard way. As I ate my sandwich, I remembered something my old accounting partner used to say, Eleanor, sometimes the best negotiation strategy is letting the other party talk themselves into a corner. Victor was definitely talking himself into a corner. The question was, how deep did I want to let him dig before I stopped him? I looked around the kitchen I'd designed 37 years ago. The cabinets I'd chosen, the countertops I'd installed, the windows I'd measured and ordered. My house. My trust. My choice. Victor was about to learn that respect isn't negotiable. But first, he needed to finish digging. Sunday morning brought the worst of Victor. I was getting ready for my morning walk when he arrived with 3 of his real estate agent colleagues. He'd invited them for what he called a consultation about the house's potential. I heard them before I saw them. Victor's voice carrying through the front door. This place has incredible bones, but the decor is so outdated. Classic old lady style, you know. They walked through my house like it was already theirs. "Oh my God, Victor, this crown molding is gorgeous," said a man in an expensive suit. "Original. From 1987, Victor replied. Eleanor had this place built, but she has no eye for modern design. Look at this wallpaper, and that furniture. It's like a museum." I stood at the top of the stairs, listening to them catalog my life's work like it was a flea market. "The bones are definitely there," said another man. "But you'll need to gut the kitchen. Those cabinets are so 80s. "Already planning on it," Victor said. "Eleanor will be moving to a senior community soon, so I'll have full control over renovations. Full control over my kitchen. The one Arthur and I had planned together for 6 months." I came downstairs wearing my walking clothes. 3 men I'd never met were standing in my living room taking photos. "Eleanor." Victor's voice was artificially bright. "Perfect timing. I want you to meet some colleagues." He introduced them like I was a curiosity. "This is Eleanor, Diana's mother. She's the original owner, but she's transitioning to a more suitable living situation." Transitioning. Like I was a project. "Mrs. Vance," said the man in the suit, "your house has such character. You must have put a lot of work into it." "Some," I said. "Victor tells us you're moving to Sunset Manor. That's such a nice facility." I looked at Victor. "Is that what I'm doing?" "We discussed this, Eleanor. November 15th, remember?" "I remember you discussing it." An uncomfortable silence settled over the group. The real estate agents exchanged glances. "Well," said the suited man, "we should probably let you get to your walk." "Actually," Victor said, "Eleanor, while everyone's here, maybe you could tell them about the maintenance issues. The roof leak, the furnace problems." There was no roof leak. The furnace was 2 years old. "I'm not aware of any maintenance issues," I said carefully. "Eleanor, you know the upstairs bathroom faucet drips and the basement gets damp in the spring. The faucet needs a 50-cent washer. The basement has been dry for 20 years. Victor's smile tightened. "Eleanor's very attached to this place. Sometimes she doesn't see problems that are obvious to others." "Problems like what?" I asked. "Like the fact that you can't afford to maintain a house this size anymore." The room went quiet. Even the real estate agents looked uncomfortable. "Can't afford it?" I asked. "Eleanor, we've been through this. Your Social Security barely covers basic living expenses. And you know this how? Because I'm not blind. You drive a 15-year-old sedan. You shop with coupons. You haven't updated anything in this house since the Clinton administration." One of the agents cleared his throat. "Maybe we should reschedule this tour." "No, it's fine," Victor said. "Eleanor understands this situation. She's had 2 years to adjust to reality since Arthur died." "What reality is that?" I asked. "That you're an elderly woman on a fixed income who can't handle a 2,400 square foot house anymore. The point is you're making assumptions about my finances." "They're not assumptions, Eleanor. They're observations." "Observations about what?" "About the fact that you've been living off Diana's generosity for 2 years, and now that Diana's gone, you need to face reality." The words hung in the air like tear gas. The 3 real estate agents were actively looking for exits. "Diana's generosity," I repeated. "Yes. Diana paid your property taxes. Diana covered your utilities. Diana made sure you had groceries and medical care." "Did she?" You know she did. And you know this because I was married to her. I saw her writing the checks. What checks? Victor's face flushed. The checks for your expenses. Did you see her write checks to the county for property taxes? She handled those things online. Did you see her pay my electric bill? She transferred money to your account. Did you ever see bank statements showing these transfers? We kept our finances separate. So you never actually saw any of these payments. The suited agent stepped forward. You know what, Victor? This feels like a family discussion. Maybe we should give you some privacy. No, Victor said sharply. This needs to be said. Eleanor, you cannot keep living in denial about your financial situation. What denial? The denial that you're anything other than a burden. The word echoed through the room. Even Victor seemed surprised he'd said it out loud. A burden, I said quietly. I'm sorry, but yes. You're a burden. You have been since Arthur died. Diana was too kind to say it, but someone has to. Too kind to say what? That supporting you was bankrupting her. Bankrupting her. Yes. The property taxes alone are $8,000 a year. Add utilities, maintenance, your medical expenses. He was building steam now, letting 2 months of frustration pour out. Diana spent $40,000 last year keeping you afloat. $40,000 at least. And now she's gone and I'm supposed to pick up that burden? I have my own life to think about. The real estate agents were edging toward the door. So, you're throwing me out, I said. I'm giving you 10 days to find appropriate housing. That's more generous than most people would be. Generous. Yes, generous. Because frankly, Eleanor, you never contributed anything to Diana's success. She built her own life, earned her own money, bought her own house. This house? Yes, this house. Diana inherited it from Arthur. And now I inherit it from Diana. That's how inheritance works. I nodded slowly. I see. Good. Finally. Victor. What? You might want to check your facts before making statements like that in front of witnesses. He laughed. What facts, Eleanor? I'm a real estate professional. I know how property ownership works. Do you? Better than you do, apparently. I looked at the 3 men by the door. They were witnessing something they definitely hadn't signed up for. Gentlemen, I said, you might want to ask Victor to show you the deed to this house before you start planning renovations. Victor's face went white. Eleanor, don't. Don't what? Don't tell the truth? But I'd said enough. Sometimes the best revenge is letting people hang themselves with their own words. Enjoy your tour, I said, and headed for the front door. I had a lawyer to call. Monday morning, I sat in attorney Margaret Collins' office with 3 manila folders on the mahogany desk between us. Margaret Collins, no relation to my late husband, just another of life's small coincidences, had been handling my legal affairs for 20 years. She knew exactly what those folders contained. Eleanor, she said, adjusting her reading glasses. I have to ask. Are you sure you want to do this? I'm sure. Because once we start this process, there's no taking it back. Victor will know everything. Good. Margaret opened the first folder. Let's review what we have. The original deed to 447 Maple Street lay on top. Eleanor Vance, sole owner, recorded March 15, 1987. No co-signers, Margaret noted. No joint ownership, no mortgage. You paid cash for the land and construction. Correct. She opened the second folder. Property tax records for 37 years, all paid by you from your accounts. Correct. Insurance policies, utility bills, maintenance contracts. All in your name. Correct. She opened the third folder. And this is the big one. The Eleanor and Arthur Vance Family Trust. The trust documents were thick, complex, full of legal language that took years to develop and decades to fund. Current balance? Margaret asked, though she already knew. $853,412 as of last Friday. And Diana's status in the trust? Beneficiary during her lifetime. Never a trustee, never an owner. Margaret leaned back in her leather chair. Eleanor, this is a substantial estate. Victor had no idea. None. And Diana never told him about the trust structure. Diana was a good daughter, but she wasn't detail-oriented about finances. She knew I helped her when she needed help. She probably never thought to explain where the money came from. So, Victor assumed that Diana was supporting you, instead of the other way around. Margaret shook her head. It's understandable, I suppose. Young couples don't usually have trusts this size backing them up. The irony is beautiful, I said. Victor kicked me out of my own house, using my own money to threaten me. How so? Diana's life insurance. $150,000. He's been making plans with that money for 2 months. But the beneficiary is the trust, which means the beneficiary is me. Margaret pulled out a calculator. So, let me make sure I understand. Victor thinks he inherited a $420,000 house and $150,000 in life insurance. That's right. But actually, he inherited nothing. The house belongs to you, and the insurance money goes to your trust. That's right. And he's been treating you like a charity case while planning to spend nearly $600,000 that was never his. That's right. Margaret was quiet for a moment, processing the situation. Eleanor, I have to ask, why did you let this go on for 2 months? Why didn't you correct his assumptions immediately? I thought about that Sunday morning scene, Victor calling me a burden in front of strangers, the casual cruelty of it. Because I wanted to see how far he'd go. And he went pretty far. Margaret nodded. What do you want to do now? I want to establish clear boundaries. Legal boundaries? All kinds of boundaries. She pulled out a legal pad. Talk to me. First, I want the insurance claim processed immediately. The money belongs to the trust, not to Victor. Done. That's straightforward. Second, I want Victor served with formal notice that he's a tenant in my house, not an owner. Also straightforward. How much notice? 10 days. The same time frame he gave me. Margaret smiled slightly. Poetic justice. Third, I want him to understand exactly what Diana's relationship to the trust was, so he can't claim ignorance going forward. We can provide complete documentation. And fourth, I paused. I want witnesses present when we have this conversation. Witnesses? The same real estate agents who heard him call me a burden yesterday. They should hear the truth, too. Margaret set down her pen. Eleanor, that feels like public humiliation. No. Public humiliation is what Victor did to me. This is public education. There's a difference. Victor humiliated me to make himself feel powerful. I'm educating people to prevent future misunderstandings. Margaret considered this. The real estate agents aren't necessary for the legal process, but they're necessary for the social process. Explain. Victor spent 2 months telling people that I'm a broke old woman living off family charity. Those people deserve to know the truth. And Victor deserves to hear that truth in front of the same people he lied to. Exactly. Margaret made notes on her legal pad. When do you want to do this? Tomorrow. Give Victor 24 hours to enjoy his assumptions. And if he refuses to meet, then we serve the papers without explanation and let him figure it out. Margaret pulled out her calendar. I can have everything ready by 10 a.m. tomorrow. Perfect. Where do you want to meet? Victor's real estate office. Where his colleagues can see what respect looks like. Margaret looked up from her calendar. Eleanor, I've been practicing law for 30 years. I've seen a lot of family disputes. This isn't about the money, is it? No. It's about the disrespect. It's about boundaries. Victor needs to learn that you can't treat people badly just because you think they're powerless. And if he'd been respectful from the beginning, then we'd be having a different conversation. I would have explained the situation privately and helped him transition to independence. But he wasn't respectful. He was cruel. There's a difference between grief and cruelty. Margaret closed the folders. I'll make the calls this afternoon. Thank you. Eleanor? Yes? For what it's worth, I think Diana would be proud of how you're handling this. I stood up and shook her hand. Diana taught me something important. What's that? That quiet strength beats loud ignorance every time. She was a smart woman. She learned from the best teacher. Arthur? No. Life. Life taught her that respect is earned, not inherited. As I left the law office, I thought about Victor's timeline. He'd given me until November 15th to move out. Tomorrow was November 5th. He was about to learn that some deadlines cut both ways. And some assumptions cost more than you can afford to pay. The quiet woman was about to speak up. And when quiet women finally speak, smart people listen. Victor was about to find out exactly how smart he really was. Tuesday morning at 10 a.m., Margaret Collins and I walked into Premier Realty on Main Street. Victor was at his desk, showing house photos to a young couple. He looked up when we entered, and his face went from a professional smile to confusion, to something approaching alarm. Eleanor? What are you doing here? We need to talk, I said calmly. Privately. The young couple looked between us, sensing tension. I'm with clients, Victor said, his real estate agent composure kicking in. Can this wait? No, Margaret Collins said, stepping forward. I'm Margaret Collins, attorney at law. We need to discuss some urgent legal matters regarding your late wife's estate. The words, attorney, and legal matters, had an immediate effect. The young couple exchanged glances. Maybe we should reschedule, the husband said. No, that's fine, Victor said quickly. Eleanor, can you just wait in the conference room? I'll be right there. Actually, Margaret said, I think your colleagues should remain. Victor's face went ashen. My colleagues? The three men from Sunday? I believe they are contemplating renovations based on certain assumptions that require immediate correction. Across the office, conversations quieted. Other agents returned to their desks, pretending to work while clearly straining to listen. Eleanor, what is this about? Victor's voice had a sharp edge now. It's about the house, I said simply. We already dealt with the house. No, you dealt with the house, I replied. I listened. Victor's client couple was already backing toward the exit. We will definitely call you to reschedule, the wife said. Wait. Victor called out, but they were already gone. The suited agent from Sunday, James, I believe his name was, approached cautiously. Victor, is everything all right? Everything is fine, Victor said through clenched teeth. Eleanor is just struggling to accept her new living situation. Actually, Margaret said, opening her briefcase, Eleanor is having difficulty accepting her old living situation. What is that supposed to mean? Margaret pulled out the first folder. It means we must clarify some significant misconceptions regarding property ownership. There are no misconceptions, Victor insisted. I inherited Diana's house. What house is that? Margaret asked. 447 Maple Street. And you possess documentation of this inheritance? Diana's will? Diana's will left all her personal property to me, yes. Her car, her clothes, her personal effects, and her house. Diana didn't own a house. The words dropped into the office like stones into still water. Every conversation stopped. What do you mean she didn't own a house? Victor asked. Margaret opened the folder and produced the deed. 447 Maple Street is owned by Eleanor Vance. Purchased March 15, 1987. No co-signers, no joint ownership, no mortgage. That's impossible. Here's the deed. Victor snatched the paper from her hand and read it. His face went from pale to white. This must be incorrect, he insisted. Diana inherited this house when Arthur died. Arthur Vance owned no property, Margaret Collins stated flatly. Everything was purchased solely by Eleanor Vance before their marriage. But Diana lived there her entire life. As Eleanor's daughter. In Eleanor's house. James and the other agents were drawing closer now, captivated despite themselves. I don't understand, Victor said, shaking his head. Diana paid all the bills. The taxes, the utilities, everything. No, I said quietly. Diana helped me around the house. I paid all the bills. That is not true. Margaret pulled out the second folder. Property tax records for 37 years, all paid by Eleanor Vance. Insurance policies, she continued, pulling out stacks of papers, all in Eleanor Vance's name. Utility bills, bank records, maintenance contracts, all Eleanor Vance. Victor stared at the documents as if they were in a language he couldn't read. This is nonsensical, he said. Diana had money. Good money. She was an engineer. Diana was comfortable because Eleanor made sure she was comfortable, Margaret said. What does that mean? Margaret pulled out the third folder. The Eleanor and Arthur Vance Family Trust. Current balance, $853,412. The office was now completely silent. Diana was a beneficiary of the trust during her lifetime, Margaret continued. Eleanor provided financial support for Diana's education, her wedding, and her various needs. Are you saying Eleanor was supporting Diana? I am saying Eleanor was supporting her daughter from her own resources. Victor sank into his desk chair. But Diana told me she was helping you financially. Diana was helping me practically, I clarified. Groceries, rides to appointments, yard work. I was helping her financially. The life insurance, Victor said suddenly, a spark of hope in his eyes. Diana's life insurance. That is mine. Margaret pulled out the final paper. The beneficiary of Diana's life insurance policy is the Eleanor and Arthur Vance Family Trust. No. Yes. That money belongs to Eleanor. Victor looked around the office. Every single agent was staring at him. The man who had been so arrogant on Sunday, so assured of his inheritance, so dismissive of the old woman's rights. Eleanor, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I didn't know. You didn't ask, I replied. You could have told me. You could have asked respectfully. Margaret closed the folders. Victor, you have 10 days to find alternative housing arrangements. 10 days. The same timeline you gave Eleanor. But, where will I go? That is no longer Eleanor's concern, Margaret said. You are a capable adult with a career. I am sure you will figure something out. Victor looked at me with an expression I had never seen from him before. It looked almost like respect. Eleanor, I'm sorry. I made assumptions. Yes, you did. Can we work something out? Some kind of arrangement? I considered his question. Around us, the real estate office was perfectly quiet. Victor, respect isn't negotiable. It never was. I understand that now. Do you? Yes. Good. That is the first step toward earning it back. Margaret and I headed for the door. Eleanor, Victor called after me. What happens now? I turned back. Now you learn what I have always known. What's that? That quiet people aren't weak people. We're just selective about when we use our voices. And with that, we left. The silence we left behind spoke volumes. By Thursday morning, the story had circulated through Cleveland's suburban real estate community like wildfire. I knew this because Helen Davis, my neighbor for 37 years, brought me coffee and the latest gossip. Eleanor, you should have seen Victor at the grocery store yesterday, Helen said, settling into Arthur's old chair at my kitchen table. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. How so? Well, for starters, he was in the clearance aisle. Victor. The man who never bought anything that wasn't a designer label. And, Helen stirred her coffee thoughtfully, he was by himself. Usually, he has those real estate colleagues of his trailing him like he's some kind of celebrity. Maybe they were busy. Or maybe they're keeping their distance now that the truth is out. Helen had always been perceptive about social dynamics. What truth is that? I asked, though I already knew. That he spent 2 months treating you like a charity case while planning to spend money that was never his. Helen shook her head. People are talking, Eleanor, and not in a good way for Victor. What are they saying? That he showed appalling judgment. That he made assumptions about finances without doing his homework. And in real estate, homework matters. Exactly. His broker summoned him for a meeting yesterday afternoon. This was news to me. How do you know that? Because my sister's daughter works at Premier Realty. She said the whole office was buzzing about what happened Tuesday morning. Helen leaned forward conspiratorially. Apparently, 3 different clients have already demanded to be transferred to other agents. Why? Because if Victor can't figure out who owns a house he's been living in for 8 years, how can he be trusted with their real estate transactions? I hadn't considered that angle, but it made perfect sense. Real estate was built on trust and competence. Victor had publicly demonstrated a lack of both. There's more, Helen continued. You know that young couple he was meeting with when you showed up? Vaguely. They posted about it on social media. Something about dodging a bullet with an agent who doesn't understand property law. They posted about it with photos of the office and everything. It's gotten hundreds of likes. The ripple effects were spreading faster than I'd anticipated. My phone rang. Margaret Collins. Eleanor, we have some developments. Good or bad? Depends on your perspective. Victor's attorney called this morning. He hired an attorney. Apparently. He wanted to discuss a settlement. What kind of settlement? Victor would like to remain in the house for 6 months instead of 10 days. He's offering to pay rent. How much rent? $2,000 a month. I almost laughed. For a house worth $420,000? Market rent would be closer to $3,000, I said. Yes. What did you tell him? That we'd consider reasonable offers. And what's reasonable? $3,500 a month. First and last month in advance, plus a security deposit equal to 1 month's rent. So, $10,500 up front. Correct. If he wants to stay, he pays market rate like any other tenant. Can he afford that? That's not our problem. But his attorney seemed to think it might be challenging given his current circumstances. After I hung up, Helen was studying my face. Victor wants to stay, she asked. He wants to pay below market rent to stay. And you said? I said he can pay market rent, just like anyone else. Helen nodded approvingly. Fair is fair. Friday afternoon brought another visitor. Diana's old college friend, Mike Thompson. Eleanor, I owe you an apology, he said at my front door. For what? For believing Victor's version of things. He told everyone that Diana was supporting you financially. And you believed him. I did. And I'm sorry. I should have known better. Mike shifted uncomfortably. The thing is, Diana always talked about how proud she was of your success. How you'd had this house built, how you'd managed your investments, how you'd taught her about financial responsibility. So, why did you believe Victor? Because it fit what I expected to see. An elderly woman, widowed, a grown daughter helping out. It just seemed natural. Assumptions again. Yeah. And I'm not the only one. A lot of Diana's friends made the same assumption. And now we're all feeling pretty stupid. And we're wondering what else Victor might have misrepresented about Diana. That was an interesting development. Victor's credibility was collapsing across multiple social circles. Saturday morning, Margaret Collins called with the final update. Victor's attorney called back. And? He said he can't afford the rent, so he's moving out. But there's something else. What? He's also leaving Premier Realty. Voluntarily, let's call it mutually agreed upon. So, Victor was losing his house and his job in the same week. Eleanor, I have to ask, do you feel bad about any of this? I looked around my kitchen, the one Arthur and I had designed together, the one Victor had planned to gut and renovate. Margaret, Victor made choices. He chose to be cruel instead of kind. He chose assumptions instead of questions. He chose to humiliate me in front of strangers. And now, he's facing consequences. Natural consequences. You didn't fire him from his job. His clients did that by requesting other agents, because they lost confidence in his judgment. Exactly. This isn't revenge, Eleanor. This is accountability. And Victor. Victor is learning that actions have consequences. It's a lesson he should have learned years ago. Sunday morning, I sat quietly in my living room, thinking about forgiveness and boundaries. They weren't opposite things, I realized. They were complementary. I could forgive Victor for his assumptions and still maintain boundaries about respect. I could forgive his cruelty and still expect him to face the natural consequences of his choices. Forgiveness didn't mean pretending nothing had happened. It meant accepting what had happened and moving forward with wisdom. Victor was moving out next weekend, and I was moving forward with a new understanding of my own quiet power. Sometimes the best lesson you can teach someone is to let them teach themselves. 3 weeks later, I was in my living room reading the Sunday paper when the doorbell rang. Victor stood on my porch with a moving box in his hands. Hi, Eleanor. Victor. I found some items that belong to you. Photo albums from when Diana was little. Some of Arthur's old recipe cards. I opened the door wider. Come in. He set the box on the coffee table and looked around the room he'd planned to renovate. It looks the same, he said. Why would it look different? I don't know. I guess I thought you might change things. After everything. Some things don't need changing. We sat in the quiet for a moment. Eleanor, he finally said, I owe you more than an apology. You don't owe me anything. Yes, I do. I treated you terribly. I made assumptions about your life, your finances, your worth. I was cruel when I should have been grateful. And now I understand something I should have understood from the beginning. What's that? That Diana learned her values from someone. Her kindness, her generosity, her quiet strength. She learned all of that from you. I nodded. Diana was a good daughter. She was. And you were a good mother. I just couldn't see it, because I was too busy making assumptions. We all make assumptions, Victor. The question is what we do when we learn we're wrong. I'm trying to learn from this. Good. I found a job in Columbus. Fresh start. New city. Maybe I can do better there. I hope you can. He stood to leave, then turned back. Eleanor, can I ask you something? Of course. If I'd been respectful from the beginning, if I'd asked questions instead of making demands, would things have been different? I thought about that. Probably. I would have helped you transition to independence. Given you time to find your feet. We might have found a way to honor Diana's memory together, instead of fighting over it. Victor picked up his bag. I guess respect really isn't negotiable, is it? No. It's not. Thank you for teaching me that. After he left, I opened the box. He'd brought Diana's baby pictures, Arthur's handwritten recipes, small treasures that had somehow ended up in the wrong hands. I thought about the past 3 months. The funeral, the confrontation, the legal resolution, the natural consequences. Victor had learned an expensive lesson about assumptions and respect. But I'd learned something, too. I'd learned that quiet strength doesn't mean silent acceptance of disrespect. I'd learned that boundaries aren't walls, they're guidelines for healthy relationships. Most importantly, I'd learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply tell the truth and let people deal with the consequences of their own choices. Diana would have been proud of that lesson. Arthur would have approved of the quiet way I'd handled it. And I was at peace. If you are hearing this and you've ever been underestimated because of your age, your quiet nature, or your humble lifestyle, let me know. Have you ever had to remind someone that respect isn't inherited, it's earned? Sometimes the best response to disrespect is simply proving them wrong. And sometimes, the most powerful people in the room are the ones who don't need to prove anything at all. Remember, quiet doesn't mean weak. It just means selective.